Good morning, everyone. EagleX from ATX EagleX Gaming here today, and I have another video for you guys. Wanted to get this out a little bit earlier, but with how the results from the last regional ended, there's actually a new deck our locals have been playtesting, and it's kind of shaking up how the end of BT12 EX4 was going to shape up. So I had to readjust this video, put in some new thoughts for how I thought this format would end. But before we start talking about the meta itself and what I'm predicting it to be, if you have not already liked, comment, or subscribed to the channel, I would appreciate your support, as it lets me know I'm going in the right direction for the type of content you guys enjoy. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the overall event. So if you're going to this regional to aim for a Nationals invite, what is like a guaranteed or very safe record to have to get this invite? So if there's a capped out event of 256 players, and we play 8 rounds of Swiss with only top 16 players getting invites, and this assumes there's no pass downs, there's a chance there's probably 1 invite, or maybe 2 pass downs to the next eligible person. But the safe record is if you go 8-0 winning the event, or X1, you should have your invite, but this accounts for no ties, so X11 and X1 are probably your safe records. If you go X2, there's a good chance you'll probably miss it, assuming in a world there's no ties. The majority of X2 players miss it, so just keep that in mind. But if you're trying to play for pricing, we have some pretty cool pricing. We have event pack 4s, and we have the new regional pack, set 2. I think, yeah, I have set 1 listed. It should be set 2, though. Event pack 4 is the one with the plugins. So you're chasing the Palmon, you're chasing the green plugin, and you're chasing the x-antis, Tamers, and the Mimi now, because of the BT13 cards right around the corner. Not legal for this event, by the way, because we are in the BT12 EX4 format, but you can see how it ranges for the pricing for that stuff. But now to talk about the main meat of this video, stuff I wanted to talk about. If you have not seen the Carta Magica regional we had this previous weekend, Lilithmon won in a mill deck. Millithmon is what people are calling it. There's only 3 people that brought this deck, but it has shown it has strong power and can contend for top spots in this format. But I want to point out, there is an overwhelming amount of people playing Blue Flare with the EX4 support. Some builds run Kazuha with Kaiser Nail in Superior mode. Other builds are just straight consistency with more of the red package to be a bit more aggressive. You have Greymon Piles. That's why I call a deck that uses more than that uses 3 or more Greymon level 6s, because it turns into more of a toolbox. One of the more common builds being a Black War X variant that uses Black War, Gaiamon, and Black War X. So you could technically break it apart, but it's still a pile of Greymon cards at the end of the day. And Hunters, taking up the 3rd most popular amount of decks for the meta share. So I would say those are the 3 most popular decks and decks to beat in this format, and it'll kind of trickle down here. But if you guys aren't aware, we'll talk about the Millith deck here in just a bit, because I do think it has a good shot of doing well in this format, and I'll kind of explain some of the reasons why the deck will do well to some extent. But first, I mentioned Greymon Piles are going to be the most popular deck. Tai is a crazy high value card. Combine it with Cool Boy, you have 2 Tamers that can give you extra memory to extend turns and plays. If you combo it with EX1 Greymon to cheat out Tai, you have Raid Metal Gray to cheat out maybe a Fixer, an X-anti option to extend to level 6s. You can do a whole lot in one turn. Not only cheating the memory gauge, getting extra DP, getting option immunity, and honestly, Greymon Piles just have an answer for every deck in the format to some capacity. What you feel like is going to be represented more in the meta could be how you build the deck. So if you're expecting Greymon Pile mirrors, I would definitely lean towards the Raid Metal Gray level 5 a bit more than your other level 5s. But that being said, Greymon Piles have been around for a while. This is a format that, due to the restriction list of Beelzemon, this is one of the faster decks, and Beelzemon was one of the more difficult decks for it because it was very fast with EX2 Impmon. But with that at 1, you probably won't see as much Beelzemon, which I think makes Greymon Pile in a better spot than it was for Japan in this format. But I would expect to see roughly 2 to 3 of these decks in a an 8 to 9 round tournament. And when I say 2 to 3, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to see it, but that's what I would expect to see, be prepared to play against, as it is one of the more popular decks, along with Blue Flare, which I would say is probably in a similar spot. You'll see 2 to 3 Blue Flare decks on average, like if you take down the meta share for what it is, just because I feel like you'll see the majority of players playing it, and I do think it is one of the better decks as well, as it has lots of aggression, it can push hard. Blazing Memory Boost from Kazuha is a powerful, high-value play. But keep in mind, Floodgate rookies are a thing against this deck. You can slow down the Rush Metal Gray by making them cost a full 7. There are answers for it in blue decks, but just be aware that those are potential cards you can run into or tech into your decks if you're playing a red, black, or purple deck. Moving along to Hunters, though, this was the deck that brought me a lot of joy when I started playing BT12. The combo potential, the resource value, the in-game boards felt so fun to me. This isn't a playstyle for everyone. It's definitely a lot more combo and resource intensive. But yet again, the play cost reduction floodgates are pretty powerful to slow down the deck a bit, but there are natural answers like Omni Shoutmon. But when you play against this deck, there's some things you have to be aware of. Make sure you respect Arrestermon's removal for when digivolving, and make sure you have an out for Quartzmon. If you don't have an out for Quartzmon, this could be a rough matchup with for you, especially if you see Psychmons go into Astamons, and Astamons use their digivolving effect to warp into Quartzmon. It can be a one-card Quartzmon combo that you may not be ready for. So just make sure you have a way to respect Quartzmon. Not only in Hunters, though, you can see it pop up in other decks like Bloom Hydra. But Hunters is a deck I would expect to see 1 to 3 copies of on your 8-9 round tournament run, assuming you hit like the average popular decks in format. So make sure you know how to play against this matchup. It probably wouldn't be the one I'm most prepared for, but at least have knowledge in your back pocket. And then moving on to some of the less popular decks, but decks I think have a great niche in the meta right now. First one being the newcomer of the format, the Beelzemon deck. If you guys have not seen this deck or understand how it works, it is hugely relying on the War Growlmon and Alice McCoy to provide a lot of value. The idea is when you go into War Growlmon, you play the Guilmon from EX3 that mills 2 or pops, I think, a 3k or less. But you use Alice to destroy the Guilmon to digivolve into Lilithmon, who gives you options to recur like Jack Raid's Glaive Memory Boost, Calling from the Darkness, so that you can combo into some other cards like Shine Gray Ruin Mode and get a 10k DP aura if you get them both. Though digivolving and when attacking effects in the same turn. If you don't get that, you'll get the 5k, and then next turn you'll swing on deletion, recover, hatch an egg. You'll get a lot of tempo and value out of it. And just be aware, if you give a minus DP aura on your opponent's side and they attempt to use any on-plays, if the Digimon dies to DP reduction, then it will not be able to resolve that on-play effect, as it will be in the trash before it resolves the on-play. And the last thing is you'll see Creepymon be the finisher for this deck. The EX4 Guilmon gives Rush to this deck, if I recall correctly, so you will be able to Creepy out of essentially nowhere, it feels, because there's so much memory manipulation in the Millith Loop deck. But this deck has definitely overperformed in playtesting with locals, and I think it actually has a good shot of showing up in more popular mounts. I'm expecting an average run to have 1 to 2 copies of this deck in your run, so don't be too surprised if you see it. And it really does shine from the lack of floodgates right now. We don't see the Evo reduction floodgate, we don't see the memory floodgates as much. They do exist, like Madoki and Blue Flare and Gazi in your purple decks, but they're not as popular as they once were, and this deck definitely abuses that. But moving on to our next deck, good old Red Hybrid. Nothing better than the old, reliable, aggressive deck that keeps swinging security for multiple checks, ignoring options, gaining memory, depending on what you have in the stack. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about Red Hybrid itself. It's just a hyper-aggressive deck that you should respect to some extent, but I wouldn't build my entire deck around beating this deck per se. So just make sure you have answers to hyper-aggressive decks to either slow them down using options like Kongu, Blockers don't do a whole lot against this deck. If they have Atomic Inferno, they gain a lot of memory, but deleting Tamers will have a good amount of value in the matchup. And then this deck has been hit with EX2 Imp onto 1. However, Beelzemon has lots of potential still, as it's still topping a strong amount in Japan, and I think people have just kind of slept on this deck since it got hit. I definitely would not sleep on this deck too much if you don't know what to bring. This is one of those good old reliable decks that has lots of milling power. You can stack your deck with I Am Mako, have lots of memory extension plays. Even though you only have one EX2 Imp, you can still mill and get your deck set up into the trash. And then these are decks that I think are still in a good spot that I could see coming up, but I don't put them in the other category because they're still high, like tier 2, if not very low tier 1 decks. I would say they're probably the high end of tier 2, being Bloomlord and Machinedramon. These decks have lots of... The Bloomlord has a higher player skill cap, the Machinedramon has a higher control, and Machine's more of a counter towards Red Hybrid, and it has a fair response to Hunters, but it's not the best matchup in the world. But I would say you could probably see one of these two decks. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of them, though, because Machine's much more of a meta call. Bloomlord's a deck that's probably played more in BT13 than EX4 just because it gets new support. And then moving on to our last section is the decks I call Other. At the end of every format, I know it's in the top right corner, Commandramon always finds a way to peek around. Security Control comes, as shown bottom left, from being in a refined format where they understand how to counter the meta. So there's been a lot of builds that run the Wisemon with the Black or Gray or the Megidramon based on what they're trying to counter more, and Shadow Seraphi even. Dark Knight, it got support in EX4, so I can see it coming up a little bit more often than some of these other decks, but it's not the best deck in format, and I'd probably put it at the bottom of tier 2, possibly tier 3. Then Cross, good old reliable deck. I don't think it's in a bad spot, it's just not popular, and it doesn't have a reason to do exceptionally well right now. And then Old Force, it's Old Force. It's at the bottom of tier 2, tier 3 in my opinion. With that being said, what do you guys think you would expect to see if you were to go to this regional? With that being said, thank you for watching, take care, and have a good one.